Okay, kids. The questions. Ready for them? No, you're not ready for them? Question number 1. Really simple one. Who did Habakkuk take stew to in a lion's den? Who did Habakkuk take stew to in a lion's den? Number 2. The pastor had a friend who died. What was his name? And number 3, what does Habakkuk mean? You got a leader right behind you who has given me the thumbs up, so we can go on. You heard them. And you should have them written. Hopefully you guys got a sheet. Do you? Yeah, good. Thank you, Emelina. You're amazing. You and everybody else down there. We are starting a new series called Silence. What do you do when God's just doesn't seem to be there? He's not quite speaking as loud as you wish that he was. What do you do? And we're going to be talking about a story from Habakkuk. But before we get there, I have to admit something here. I was struggling with this sermon last night, so I'm not sure that what I wrote is actually going to come out. So I'll get you the blanks, but everything in between could be questionable. Which usually makes my family scared, because that's when I really mess up, is when I go off my notes. So just so you're aware. So we're talking about silence and Habakkuk. And before we get there, about a dozen years ago, something like that, my wife and I took a trip to Maui, which is an interesting thing to do, especially from Edmonton. You fly into Vancouver, then you fly into Maui, and it's a fairly long flight. But once you get there, and it seems like all of the planes land like almost in the middle of the night. So you're getting there and it's dark, and you're trying to find where you're supposed to be. And we had never been there before, didn't know the island at all. So the first thing we had to do was go get our rental car. So we went to the place that had the rental car, and we had rented a small compact economy car. And the guy at the desk goes, you guys ordered this early, so I'm authorized to give you a free upgrade. And I said, okay. And for just a little bit more, I can give you an even better upgrade. So he told us what the free upgrade was. And he said, for just a little bit more, I can get you a Mustang convertible. So we went for the little bit more and got the Mustang convertible. I figured if we're in Hawaii, might as well, right? So we got out with the Mustang. Now we had to drive to the other side of the island where we were actually staying. And so we started to drive. I had the directions in my head, and I want you to know, I turned the right way. I did. But I got about a mile down the road, and I started questioning myself, is this really the way I'm supposed to be going down? Don't give me any top results. My tablet, it must be connected to internet, and it's talking to me. But we finally found the place where we were supposed to be, and we got all of our stuff in, and it felt like it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and Nelda went straight to bed. I was too wired to go to bed, and so I didn't. And I stayed up. I wanted to see what was on TV, and unfortunately, it was something that I was interested in, which made it even worse. So the channel that I turned on was doing a bit of a documentary on the Paul is dead conspiracy theory, that Paul McCartney died in 1966. And so I'm going, okay, I'll look into this and see what this is all about. And so I listened to most of the evidence that was there. I'm sorry, I'm not where I'm supposed to be, and I'm trying to figure out why. This is not working for me. Let's try to close everything down, and then Office Remote. Okay. Anyways, so I started listening to this documentary on on the Beatles, or on Paul McCartney dying in a car crash. There, it's up there, good. So they started to go through all the evidence that Paul McCartney wasn't really Paul McCartney. It was this guy they called William Campbell or William Shepherd, whose name was shortened to Billy Shears. That was who was singing with the Beatles. It wasn't Paul McCartney. They found an exact lookalike who happened to be able to sing like Paul and write music like Paul, but wasn't Paul. Sounds like a simple job to me. So I started to look at all of the different things that they did. And at the time, the Beatles were experimenting with backmasking, putting messages in their songs if you spun the record backwards. And so apparently they were experimenting. So when you get to revolution number 9 and you spin a certain section of that backwards, you hear the words, well, you really need a lot of imagination even to hear the words there, but turn me on, dead man. So it was the first evidence that Paul McCartney is no longer with us. The second piece of evidence came from Strawberry Fields Forever. One of the weirdest, although one of the songs I like the most from the Beatles, it's a double A side single with Strawberry Fields on one side and Penny Lane on the other. And if you go to the end of that and listen closely, you will hear John Lennon say, "I buried Paul." Now, just so you know, John Lennon says that he said cranberry sauce. You make the decision. But another piece of evidence is, as you look at the cover for this, you'll see 3 Beatles facing forward and 1 Beatle turned around. Do you know which Beatles turned around? Paul. You got George, then Paul turned around, then John, and then you got Ringo. And apparently John says, "I buried Paul." Now, if you go to "I'm Tired" for another single, okay, it's not moving. There he is. And you go and you have to spin this one backwards again. So you go to the end of the song and you spin it backwards. You'll hear someone say, "Paul is a dead man. Miss him, miss him, miss him." So obviously, Paul's dead. What else? What other evidence can you really do you need to find out that Paul is dead? I'm going to have to depend on you. But one of the main pieces of evidence is this famous album cover for Abbey Road of the 4 Beatles walking across the street. And the evidence that is in this of that Paul is dead is this. No, go back. We don't want to get there yet. If you're looking at the legs, you'll notice that John's leading, next is Ringo, Paul, and George. And George, Ringo, and John are all stepping out with their left foot. But the dead Paul McCartney is stepping out with his right. So he's out of step now with the rest of the Beatles. So that's part of it. The other thing you will notice is that, if you look really closely, that Paul McCartney, who is left-handed, is holding a cigarette with his right hand. So that obviously means that's really not Paul. You'll also notice that they're dressed differently. Going first to John Lennon, he's wearing a white suit. He's got a beard, and he's got long hair, which seems to indicate that he's Jesus. Or if you don't go for that, he's a pastor who's trying to be Jesus. Next, you have Ringo, and he's dressed in a suit, looks pretty good. He is the funeral director. Then you have Paul McCartney. He's got no shoes on, he's in bare feet, and a suit, because that's when they bury you don't see the feet, so they don't have to put anything on it, so it's called covered. So that is obviously meaning that Paul McCartney is the dead man. And then you've got George Harrison on the back end. He's wearing denim. That's because he's the grave digger. So again, Paul McCartney is dead. One other piece of evidence for this. Now we'll look at that Volkswagen that's in the back. If you can just make it out, the license plate is LMW 281F. Linda McCartney weeps. 28 if Paul was still alive. Now, when the album came out, he was actually 27, so that one doesn't work. But it doesn't, defer anybody from, saying that that's, again, another sign that Paul McCartney was dead. Is Paul McCartney dead? I don't think so. It's kind of funny that we went through this thing in 1969, basically. It was when it really hit big. And yet now it's Paul and Ringo are the only ones that are still with us. But for some people, and I think I know why. The Beatles were breaking up. The conspiracy came out in 66. He was supposed to have died in the car accident in November 66. But it picked up speed in 69 because I think the Beatles there was starting to be rumors swirling that they were breaking up. And people wanted to know a reason for why that was happening. And so, well, of course they're breaking up. Paul McCartney died. And so they decided to walk away. Sometimes conspiracy theories are like that. They make us believe something so that we can make sense of something that's happened. Usually something negative. Or we can at least make sense in our minds for what it is that is happening in the society at large. And sometimes, to be honest with you, we just believe in conspiracy theories because we want to belong to something. The Paul is dead conspiracy theory is one of the most, it's on the top 10 most enduring conspiracy theories. It's been around with us for the longest time and still has adherents to it. Another one on that same list is the JFK assassination. So the idea is that John F. Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, did not die in Dallas in November 1963. And I was watching just a clip of a newscast recently that was going through some conspiracy theories, and it showed a clip of this one. They were interviewing, and the reporter said, "So you think that John F. Kennedy is still alive?" And the woman said, "Yes." And as I'm watching, it was just a commercial on television, and I was kind of passing through the room, and I heard the question, I heard the answer, and I'm going, "Then you're a fool, and we need to change this question." Because the question he asked was, is John F. Kennedy still alive? The question should be that you don't believe that John F. Kennedy was killed in November 1963 in Dallas. Because if John F. Kennedy was still alive, he'd be 106 years old. Now, it's not impossible, but he's probably died. If he wasn't assassinated, he's probably dead by now. So we need to change the question. But there are still people who believe that all of this was staged, that the moon landing was staged. Conspiracy theories, we just love them. And they help us deal with hard topics and make sense of our world. We're going to look at Habakkuk this morning, and we're going to start off by looking at a couple of what I would call conspiracy theories in the Bible. So if you got your Bibles, it'll be up on the screen. Habakkuk 1, we're just going to start with one verse, the very first verse of Habakkuk. The prophecy that Habakkuk, the prophet, received. Doesn't seem like much, does it? If you're trying to fill in blanks, the first one is just simply the conspiracy theory. Here's the problem. Habakkuk starts out with just says, "Hi, my name's Habakkuk. Here's my prophecy." It doesn't tell you who Habakkuk was. It doesn't tell you who his parents were. It doesn't tell you what tribe he's from. They don't tell you what his lineage is. They don't tell you where he lived. They don't tell you anything. He just says, "Hi, my name's Habakkuk. Here's my prophecy." And we don't like that kind of silence. And so we start trying to figure out who Habakkuk was. Did you know Habakkuk is mentioned twice in the Bible? It gets a whole two mentions in the Bible, and both of them are in the book of Habakkuk. You don't have any mention in the Bible at all about Habakkuk outside of Habakkuk. That's it. It's only in Habakkuk. So we're left with this guy that we don't know, who's trying to tell us something that we should know. And so we start working on trying to figure out who he is. So, one of the ways we've done this is actually Bel and the Dragon is an addition to Daniel. We don't have it in our Bibles. I think the Catholic Bible still does have Bel and the Dragon in theirs, but it's an extension. It was written later, and it's an extension to the book of Daniel. And so Bel and the Dragon tells the story of Daniel being in the lion's den, and then God sending a messenger to Habakkuk, who is in Judah. And this messenger says to Habakkuk, as he's cooking stew, I want you to take that stew to Daniel in the lion's den. And Habakkuk turns around and looks at the angel and says, I don't know who this Daniel is, and I know nothing about a lion's den. And the angel says, well, that's fine. I'll take care of that part. And he takes and transports Habakkuk from Jerusalem to Babylon, where Daniel was in the lion's den. And Habakkuk gives the stew to Daniel in the lion's den. And then, I'm assuming with the dirty dishes, is transported back to Jerusalem. Nice story. Problem? Well, not for God. I think God can do anything. So it is a possibility, but it does have a bit of a date stretch. As best as we can tell, Habakkuk was written around 600, 612, somewhere in that area, just before Jerusalem fell. And obviously, Habakkuk wouldn't have been in Jerusalem after Jerusalem fell. I guess he could have been out in the country somewhere. The story of Daniel in the lion's den is late in Daniel's life. So you're looking like maybe 530. So you're looking at least 50, 60, maybe 70 years between the ministry of Habakkuk and Daniel. Is it possible? Sure. It's possible that John F. Kennedy's still alive. But it's a little hard to believe that, unless there's some time, there could be some time travel involved in this too. So for those of you who want that. Maybe it happened. God can do anything. But we really don't have any evidence other than this mention in Bel and the Dragon, which isn't even in our Bibles. Second conspiracy theory is, we have to go back a little further for this one. There was a Shulamite woman in the days of Elisha who went to her husband. She was wealthy, and she asked her husband if he would, or if they could build a room on the roof so that the prophet, whenever he was in town, could go up to the roof, and that would be his room. They put a nice chair in there, a bed, a candle, so it'd be all ready for him when he got there. And Elisha did do that. Anyways, one day when Elisha came, he went up to this room and he lay down there. He said to his servant Gehazi, call the Shunammite. So he called her, and she stood before him. Elisha said to him, tell her you have gone to all this trouble for us. Now, what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army? She replied, I have a home among my own people. What can be done for her? Elisha asked. Gehazi said, she has no son, and her husband is old. Then Elisha said, call her. So he called her, and she stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you will hold a son in your arms. No, Lord, she objected. Please, man of God, don't mislead your servant. But the woman became pregnant, and the next year, about that same time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her. A little later, that son dies, and Elisha comes back and raises the son to life. So the rumor is that son was Habakkuk. The problem is that the story of the Shulamite woman and the story of Habakkuk are separated by 250 years. Possible? Maybe. But it really looks like another conspiracy theory. We don't like questions. We don't like things we don't understand. And so we create stories around us to help us make sense with what's there. And sometimes those stories are hard to break. Even if somebody knows that it's wrong, it's still more comfortable to believe it. And we're even talking about Bible stories. Habakkuk. My guess is that Habakkuk was a guy not that different from you or me, who God gave a vision. And Habakkuk came and wrote down this vision, and he says, hi, my name is Habakkuk. Here's my vision. I'm a nobody. I tell you who my parents were, but that wouldn't do you any good. You don't know them. I'm not anybody important. I'm an average person living in Jerusalem. I'm going through average struggles. I have the same fears as everybody else. I haven't been educated specially, but God has given me a vision. So here's the vision. Do with it what you will. I hope you believe, because I am sure this came from God. But there's nothing in my life that will convince you of that. So I will leave it in your hands. Take it. And for years, that's exactly what we've done. See, it's not always important people that God speaks to. Sometimes it's us. And God says, you know what? I got something you need to know. Listen. Let me tell you. I think that that's exactly what the book of Habakkuk is all about. Let's read on. How long, Lord, must I call for help? But you do not listen, or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed. Justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, and justice is perverted. And again, if you're trying to fill in your blanks, that next one is big enough for grief. To me, this is it. This is Habakkuk's grief. He doesn't know what to do with what's happening in his world. There's ever a book that's written for us. I think it might be this one. I don't know, God, what's going on in our world. It seems like the wrong people are winning. And I don't understand. So God, speak to me. And the truth is, I think that God had been speaking. In fact, the existence of the book of Habakkuk says that the God had been speaking. But sometimes when you're in grief, you can't understand what it is that God is saying. Sometimes when you're in grief, you don't feel anymore. It just happens. You're numb. And people can say nice things to you, and they can hug you, and they can do all those things, and you don't quite feel it because you're grieving. You're hurting. My first real brush with grief really was in my first year of university. I was going to the University of Calgary. And I was from a small town in central Alberta. Sundre was where I graduated from. I spent grade 11 and grade 12 there. And so I graduated from a graduating class that I think had 52 people in it. The whole school. There was 52 of us. I don't think my wife said, or my daughter said there's about 2,000 in her graduating class. 700, okay. So there was more than 52. What that meant is that I really knew my graduating class at least a little bit. I knew their names, I knew who they were, etc. And I went from this small school to the University of Calgary. And if you've ever experienced that, when you go from something small to something that is huge, it's easy for you to start getting lost in the huge. I was in working towards my Bachelor of Science. I wanted to get into pre-med at the time, and so I was taking all these classes, and this other person that I didn't really know well, but he was from my graduating class, happened to have all the same classes that I did. His name was Tim. So Tim and I started to study together, and we went to class together, and we did all the things together. And one weekend, it was midterms, November, we decided that we were going to study for the weekend, which would have been a good thing to do. But we were studying on Friday at my place, and all of a sudden, Tim looked up at me and said, "Why don't we go home for the weekend? We haven't been there since we left in September. Let's just go home for the weekend. We can catch a bus up to Olds. No bus goes into Sundre, so we'll hitchhike there. We'll spend Saturday, in Sundre. Sunday afternoon, we'll meet, and we'll go back to Calgary." And I looked at him and said, "That sounds like a good plan." So that's what we did. Caught a bus to Olds, hitchhiked in from Olds to Sundre, said goodbye to each other, and he went to his home, I went to my home. I had a good weekend. It was relaxing with Mom and Dad and my sister, who's here this morning. And then on Sunday, we went to church, because that's what the Mullen family does. And I can remember going to church, and then for some reason, I'm not sure why, it was November, but I decided I wanted to walk home. It's a small town. Everything's in walking distance. So I walked home, and I can remember passing the billiard alley, the pool hall. And as I was going by, this guy sticks his head out and says, "Hey, Garry, did you hear about Tim?" And I said, "Nope, but I'm meeting him in a couple hours. We got to go back to Calgary and study for our midterms." And the guy goes, "No, you're not meeting him. He died last night." Grief comes suddenly. All of a sudden, you're neck deep in it. And sometimes you can't figure out what the next move is supposed to be. You don't feel anything. You're numb. You're not sure what to do. I wasn't sure what to do. Do I trust this guy from the pool? Do I phone his house? What do I do? My dad convinced me to phone the house. He said if the story's true, somebody will be there to answer the phone that's not the family. So you don't have to worry. And so I phoned the house. I told them who I was, that I was supposed to meet Tim in a couple hours, but I had heard that something had happened. And they said, yes, Tim passed away last night. Gone to a party. He, I think, was slipped something at the party, got a flat tire on the way home, froze to death on the side of the road. I didn't write my midterms. I didn't even go back for many classes that semester. I was done. How can the world go on when you've lost somebody that's important? How does anything happen when you're so full of grief? It was the questions I couldn't answer. Habakkuk is grieving. He's got lots of questions. He's hurting. He says, I don't understand why the wicked are winning this thing, God. You're a God of justice. What's going on here? I'm not hearing you anymore. And in the aftermath of Tim's death, I wasn't hearing people anymore. I know I wasn't. I was just trying to get through day by day by day. And most of the days, it just simply wasn't working. Grief is so hard that it can really take and almost destroy who we are. And so Habakkuk voices his grief to God. He realizes that God is a safe place for him to put his grief. Even when we sometimes don't want to do that. Because God's not listening. Why would I pray when God's not listening, instead of realizing that, you know what? God is listening. He's hearing every word. It's just in the midst of our grief, we can't feel it. We don't know it. We can't understand it. But God's still there. He's never left us. He's always been with us. Even when we can't hear him, he's there. Let's continue. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole world to seize dwellings not their own. They are feared and a dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horses come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping to devour. They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all the fortified cities. By building earthen ramps, they capture them. And then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty people whose own strength is their God. God, big enough for a radical plan. As I was reading this week through Habakkuk 1, I'm going, Habakkuk, how did you feel? How did you feel when you're crying out to God that injustice is winning and that the righteous aren't being honored and that there's no justice in the land, there's no righteousness? How did you feel when you finally heard God and said, hey, don't think that? I hear. And this is what I'm doing about it. I'm going to send a ruthless bunch of people to you. And you're probably going, God, that's not what I wanted. That's not the answer I wanted, God. And I can almost hear God's reply to Habakkuk. I know. But that's the answer you need. That's what you need from me. You need to make a break. And so I'm going to do this. I'm going to send the Babylonians. They are going to take you into captivity. There will be a break, and we will start over again. You and me. And we will build a relationship that will stand the test of time, because you'll be shut off from everything else that you need to depend on. It'll be you and me. I know it's not what you want to hear, but it's what you need. And you have to trust me. Okay, this is the part where I'm going to get in trouble. As I was reading through Habakkuk this week and really looking at this passage, memories started pouring back into me about Tim. For one thing, all of a sudden I had this memory of Tim and feeling like he was standing in front of me. What even my family doesn't know is that in the days after Tim's death, I would often see Tim on the road somewhere, find out it wasn't him. It's a conspiracy theory, right? I didn't see Tim die, therefore is he really dead? I saw him, but it wasn't him. I checked graveyards to try to find the place where he was buried. His friends weren't allowed to come to the funeral because his friends were blamed for his death. So none of us were allowed to go. So I would check graveyards around the area and just walk and see if I could find Tim's Tim's gravestone. Never did find it. I finally heard that he had been buried on the family farm. Could be another conspiracy theory, I don't know. But I was deep in grief after Tim died on that November day, and that grief continued for a while. If you've heard the story of my first 6 months away from home, it's quite a story. It sounds like it came from a movie of the week, so I won't bore you with all the details. But one of the things that happened after Tim died was that I had a friend who tried to commit suicide, wasn't successful. And then my roommate got kidnapped. And then I was held up inside my apartment by a guy with a gun. And I was lost. I had no connection, no idea. And it's probably taken me 50 years to realize that maybe God had a radical master plan for me that involved breaking me from everything that I thought was what I needed so that I could get what I wanted. I flunked out at the University of Calgary that first semester. I went to work for the Bay for a while, and then I went home. I had no intention of ever going to Canadian Nazarene College. That was off from the very beginning. I was not going there. Nobody could convince me to go there. But after that first 6 months away from home, I went to Canadian Nazarene College in Winnipeg, where I met a nice young woman named Nelda Hunt, who became my wife of the last, 42 years. A lot of things that I said would never happen, happened because of that grief. And because God decided to exercise a radical plan in my midst. I didn't think any of it was good at the time. None of it. But it worked out good in my life. The pain was there, and yet God broke me from all the things that I thought I could do and set me on a path that would eventually lead me to right here. And as I read through the story of Habakkuk, I was also kind of reading through the story of Garry. This is me. This is what happened. And it wasn't fun. I got to get that across. It really wasn't fun. But it was important because God had a plan. It was a radical plan. It really was. But it worked. I'm not sure if this is all of us or not. And I'm not sure who needs to hear this morning. But God wants to work for something great in your life. And sometimes you find yourself in bad situations and you think, God, how in the world can I ever get out of this? Are you even listening to me? And the answer is yes, I'm listening. In fact, I'm there in the situation that you're worried about right now. And what I need you to do is trust. Just trust me. Everything will be okay. Walk through the fire with me. Get to the other side with me. We were talking in the Sunday school class this morning about wounded healers, and I'm so thankful that the church is filled with a number of wounded healers that have gone through the fire. They have gotten to the other side. And now when somebody else is going through, they can empathize. They know what it's like to be in that situation. And they can walk with us as we go through that situation. I think I got a couple more verses there. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his nets. He gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying the nations without mercy? Simply big enough. One of the things that I really want to hold on from Habakkuk 1 is that Habakkuk has experienced bad things. And the conversation that he gets from God is that Babylon is coming and that Babylon is to be feared. And for most of us, what we would do at this point probably would be to disconnect from everything. God, I can't handle this. But that's not what Habakkuk does. He stays in the conversation. He stays trying to talk to God. He says, you know what? I'm here. I'm in the conversation, God. So I'm going to stay here, and we're going to wrestle this through. Which is probably good because the meaning of Habakkuk actually is one who embraces, or means to embrace, but not embrace like hugging somebody, embrace like a wrestler. So Habakkuk really means that he is going to wrestle with God. God, I'm going to wrestle with you for the truth. You're going to speak, and I'm going to speak, and I'm going to stay in the conversation until I understand. And when that time comes, then I'll know. But I'm staying here. I'm not going to run off because bad things are happening. I'm going to stay in the conversation because that's who I am. I'm the wrestler. And we're going to wrestle. You probably heard this quote a number of times, I know. You probably hear it more. It's one of my favorites. And the older I get, the more I know, or more I think it's true. It's by Walter Wink, and he says this: when we can no longer simply submit to Scripture without asking whether new light is needed to interpret it. I, for one, do not abandon Scripture, but neither do I acquiesce. I wrestle with it. I challenge it. I am broken and wounded by it. And then in defeat, I sometimes encounter the living God. God, we want to be like David, who cried out his grief to you, who cried out everything that was going wrong, but he stayed close to you. We want to be like Jacob, who wrestled with you. God, we want to be the ones who stay in the conversation until we understand. We keep coming back again and again and again, even in times when it feels like you're not talking to us, that you are silent because of all the pain that we're in. But we're going to stay here. And we're going to stay in this fight because we believe, God, that you are in it. And nothing is more important than being with you. There is this idea, this dream that we can be the people who will simply stay in the conversation with God. Hear the words. Be willing to share them with others as we move through this journey. Even in the silence. And I won't ask you, but I know that I have had times when I felt God has been silent. But even in those times, stayed in, listened, argued. I think it's okay to argue with God. I really do. David did it all the time. And he was a man after his own heart. So we argue. We want to understand. We want to be broken by God until we come to that understanding. But it's hard. I know it's hard. And it will only happen if we come to a place where we can trust him. God, your hand is in everything that I am doing. And I trust you to get me where you need me to be. Even if it means times of silence, even if it means the Babylonians are coming, I trust you. Through the hard times and the good times, I place my life in you. And I give trust to you. That's the way this life is supposed to work. Not that we've got everything done, that we have everything under control, but simply that we place our lives in God's hands and we trust him to carry us. And he will do that in good and bad. Let me pray. Father, our prayer this morning, we would love to have good news, to know that all of our problems were going to go away, that you'll fix them. But that's not often what you take from us or what we need from you. And so help us to trust. Help us to trust with the good and the bad, the mundane. Help us to trust every moment that we have that you are still on the throne and you are still in control. And Father, in everything may we give you thanks. And may we bless your name. Because we love you. We love you. And we love you. Help us to fight through the conspiracy theories and just get to the silence that you have, knowing that you are still there and you are still working in our midst, even when we can't see it. God, help us to trust. We ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. Like a